Hi, everyone. Welcome to the JupyterLab team meeting for Friday, January 6th. And this is our first team meeting for JupyterLab in 2017. All of us have taken some time off and we're more or less all plugged back in at this point. We've got some people not maybe late. They're over at visiting Bloomberg and working there for the day. But we do have some folks, so why don't we begin? And I guess I'm first in the hack pad. Haven't done much, mostly doing issue triage for JupyterLab and slowly going through the issues at this point. Hold on. Oh. At this point, I'm trying to go component by component. And in particular, I'm going in order of number of issues open for the component. And in the hack pad there, I've got an issue that I've opened where I'm posting visualizations of the number of issues we have to sort of help us get a big picture. And they're basically bar charts of the count of the number of issues grouped by the milestone and then also grouped by the component. And so that right now, open that. So right now in the beta milestone, the biggest component we have is the notebook in terms of number of issues open, then the application, then the file browser, the build system, and then a small number of issues for other components. In the overall counts, the notebook, the application, the file browser, the editor, console, terminal, those types of things, but tend to be the highest count, but I'll let everyone look at the actual issue. Many thanks to everyone who's been helping with issue triage. Our issues are actually in really, really good sort of condition on JupyterLab. We've got 200 and something issues open right now. Yeah, 214. And the main thing is they're very well organized. I don't think there's many that are sitting there dying, not getting attention. And so that's really a team effort. And I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for working so hard on that. It makes a huge difference in terms of planning and tracking all this. I am finding as I go through components for the beta release, because our issues are already so well triaged, we don't have many that we can close because they're either done or no longer relevant. And what that means is that as I do this pass, the number of beta issues is likely to go up slightly as I sort of try to figure out answer the question, what do we need to do to get each component ready for the release? The other thing that I've done is I'm teaching next week, and I was able to very easily get JupyterLab installed with Jupyter Hub. It was basically conda install JupyterLab, and I was done. The only thing that I don't have yet, and for me it's not a big deal, is the extra buttons that Jupyter Hub puts in the notebook for logging out and the control panel. Dan Allen's working on a PR in a Jupyter Hub repo that adds those, but users can always go to the classic notebook page to access those buttons for now. So I am going to offer it as an alternative to the students. They'll probably end up working both in the classic notebook and in JupyterLab throughout the quarter. But I was very, very pleased that it just magically worked. The only thing that I'm a little bit puzzled about that I at least wanted to bring up is I had opened up an issue about not being able to access lab when I had started the notebook server using Jupyter/space-notebook. And Steve, you had commented that you think JupyterLab has to be enabled in the user config rather than the sys prefix config. but I'm not finding that on my Jupyter Hub deployment. I've enabled everything in sys prefix and it all works fine. So I don't know if I have a bug on my local system, or I just wanted to see if anyone knew anything about that or any ideas.
In general, when folks have had problems, we've told them to install as user and it's worked. I know that Sylvan had opened an issue about the semantics of all of how those things are handled, and I think that's maybe still the root of the problem.
Okay. I was a little surprised it just worked with sys prefix on Jupyter Hub, but there's nothing special about Jupyter. Well, I suppose, when you run the notebook in Jupyter Hub, there is a separate top-level app, single user notebook app that Jupyter Hub has that subclasses the classic notebook app. And I suppose there could be some very subtle config difference handling that's there. But I at least wanted to bring it up with folks. The good news is Jupyter Hub is working great with it. Bad news is my local system isn't, but I can debug that. But I'll keep people posted on GitHub. That's all I have. Darren, you're next.
Hi, yeah. So I've picked up where I left off with state and session restoration. I had to do some rethinking about where the different responsibilities lie in the life cycle of from the moment the page starts loading to the moment the layout actually gets applied. So the process now is that there is a state database plugin. There is a plugin called an instance restorer, which is dependent on the state database. And then all other plugins that put widgets on the page are dependent on the instance restorer. They ask the instance restorer to restore all of the widgets they had been tracking before using their instance tracker. And as each one of those finishes, the instance restorer keeps track when every single plugin that had asked it to restore things has finished. It then fires off a restored promise. Once that's happened, and only once that's happened, there is it has the ability to then fetch from the state database a thing that describes the layout of the page. So the same instance restorer plugin that everyone's been using also registers itself with the application shell, except it has a different interface that just allows fetching and saving. So it's actually called layout DB, just to make it clear that it's a different thing, even though it's the same class. And it has the fetch method that will only work once everything is done re-rendering itself. And then the shell says, okay, go fetch my information. Currently, it stores current widget in the main area, and it stores the left area and the right area. It stores the collapse status of the left area, the collapse status of the right area, and the current widget of each of those. And then it rebuilds that. In the future, we'll also be adding the dehydrated state of the main area as well. Right now, we're only really dehydrating the left and the right area. That's the conceptual model, and it's almost there. I'm hoping, actually, before I knock off tonight, to have it done. But I would suggest everyone, once it's out there, sort of pay attention to idiosyncrasies, because there's a really well-defined life cycle, but I think it's easy to get things wrong. So I want to make sure it's working right. And it's still the exact same burden exists on plugin developers as last time we talked about it. There's nothing new that a plugin developer needs to do. All they have to do to make this work is to use the instance tracker. However, the one thing that we aren't doing that we'll start doing is every single widget on the page that attaches itself to the app shell should use an instance tracker. That includes the main menu. That includes a bottom area if we start using it. Anything that says shell add to foo area should be using an instance tracker, which is fine because for now we control all those, and then once people start building them, they'll have our models to work off of, and then everything else should sort of magically put itself together. So that's where that is, and I think once this PR goes in, I think we have beta level support for state restoration, acceptable enough that it won't annoy beta users. Like they'll lose the configuration of the main area, but they'll have enough that I think it won't be too frustrating.
Fantastic. Would it make sense to, so right now we have the top level plugin file has the logic that bootstraps the plugin and hooks it all up. And I'm wondering if eventually we might want to have a top level class that abstracts those best practices, like the instance tracker. And I know because we're ending up where, or I think eventually we're going to end up with all the top level plugins having pretty similar logic. And it may make sense to, I don't think we're there yet. I think we probably need to wait a bit more and sort of see what the final abstractions look like in the plugin file. But that may be a way that sort of helps new plugin authors follow those best practices and get things right.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we have some plugins that are really short. Like if you look at some of our plugin TS files, there may be, 10, 15 lines. And I think that the boilerplate to creating a plugin that puts a widget somewhere on the page that is restorable is actually fairly small. So that might be nice. It might even be the case. I'm not 100% sure, but it might even be the case that we could have something like an augmented function maybe in the shell, where instead of just add to main area, or maybe just add to main area automatically does some amount of work, like it takes a second field that has all of the things you need for the instance tracker to work, because basically you need to give it a command so that it can re-invoke itself, and a function that can take your widget and generate the right arguments for that command, and another function that can take your widget and generate a unique name that persists across sessions. Those are the absolute bare necessities to be able to refresh these things and to be able to serialize them. So you could imagine augmenting our add to main area, add to right area, add to left area to take a second argument that basically gives those things, and then just abstracting away the need for users to use the instance tracker at all. Maybe, I'm not sure. It's worth talking about, and it could simplify things, but it could also be, even though it might be fewer lines of code, it might be confusing. So we'd have to make sure we get the balance right. But yeah, that's completely, I think, a reasonable avenue to explore.
Very cool. And Steve?
All right, so this week I took on the revisit of the abstract editor. While I was writing tests for the code mirror implementation, I realized that we were misusing the code mirror doc, in that it is intricately tied to code mirror editor, in that it can't be used in a multi-user situation. So real-time collaboration wouldn't work where you have that doc as a model, because it has its own concept of cursors, and you can't have foreign cursors. So that led to a rethinking and actually cleaned up a lot of logic, where now the model is just a description of code itself. It's just the source code, a MIME type, and then this selections object that describes the cursors and selections from different users that are using that are looking into that model. And what that turned out to look like is that the default document that's created, the document model, is a code editor model. So that can be fed directly to the editor widget, and it just uses that to create a code editor instance to go with that. So the code mirror is using that model. So all we have is, in that case, is the document model and the code mirror doc are the two places that code exists, that string of text. And then similarly for a cell, what we had, the cell model, it is now a code editor model, in that it has those attributes and can be used directly by a cell editor, so that you have just the cell's value internally and the value in the code mirror doc. So that actually, in the process of doing that, cleaned up a lot of logic. I think personally it's a lot cleaner, and the way everything is related and structured. I think this will make real-time collaboration easier on Ian. And it turns out we can completely get rid of this thing now that we had called the cell editor, and that there's nothing special about it. The next pass will be to remove that thing, which is now just 3 signals on top of the standard inline editor, that are completion requested, this text change, state emit, and an edge requested. So those can move into the abstract editor, and then something like Monaco that provides its own completion widget will just not emit that signal. So again, that gets a lot cleaner. So we're actually, I think, really approaching the cleanest state we can get with this abstract editor, and pulling all this special logic out. And then the last piece that I'd like to do is, there's this thing in the editor interface that is extra commands, which was a backdoor hack to be able to feed implementation specific data to the editor constructor. And what we originally talked about in California when we were there was that instead of doing that, what we can do is, based on the MIME type, set appropriate metadata. So the only place we're using that right now is for things like match brackets and auto close parentheses. And so we can say, if it's a text document, don't do that. If it's otherwise, turn those settings on, and then we completely get rid of that. So that is the last vestige of code mirror specific hack that we have right now. So we're getting there, and that was the last major piece of API change, as far as the code itself. And then there's an issue open about restructuring the top level folder layout structuring, and that's in preparation for having submodules. So Phosphor is being broken into, Chris is in the process right now breaking Phosphor into logical submodules, so that you can import from a given submodule, and those are independently versioned. And the reason to do this versus what we had been doing was that if we make the level of import a module, then we were saying that module we're using that for our semver deduping, and it turned out that was not a valid way of doing it, because you couldn't logically dedupe a package at the module level. It has to be done at the package level. So we're parsing out what is a package, a sub package, and doing it at the Phosphor level, and then that PR or that issue is tracking what we need to do to make it clean at the JupyterLab level, and that will make it easier for lab dependencies to be properly deduped at the client level, because we're deduping full packages that are this package is atomic versus trying to say I have a piece of a package that I'd like to dedupe with another piece of a package.
So what will the atomic units inside the JupyterLab source be then? Is it the plugins?
No, it's actually the intent is that each folder, each subfolder is a sub package. So if all you need is document registry, you would import document registry, and that's the thing that you would have to dedupe on the client.
And each of those will have independent versions?
Yes. So Chris has got a great solution for automating that as much as we can, but still, it's still a coherent, sensible thing. It requires some discipline on the part of the package author, but it's already a part of it. As long as you're following Stember, the process works. So we'll have more. We'll talk more about that once it's implemented in Phosphor, or Chris can talk more about that now if he wants.
Okay. I mean, I trust you guys. I just want to try to understand as much of it as I can.
Yeah, it's still ultimately getting fleshed out.
Okay.
On my end, but so far it seems to be sane. It's definitely easy to develop. So like if I need to make a change in one package that I can consume from another package, it's nice that I can make the change and test it all locally and get it all running and make sure everything compiles consistently before publishing any actual packages, which is the problem where you have a different repo per package, because you have to actually make the change and publish and then install it in your new dependent package. And it wasn't actually the change I wanted, so now let me make it change. Yeah, so we eliminate that. So we don't have that pain anymore, but we do have a little bit of, you have to be a bit disciplined when releasing packages, because basically ultimately what happens is that TypeScript has a global view of the repository. And so when you're compiling packages, TypeScript thinks that whatever is currently in your repo, meaning trunk, is what it is. Like that's its view of the world. So you can run into a situation where if you're not disciplined, that you could fail to publish a dependency package, and so the consumers of your published package have a different view of the world that the TypeScript compiler had when it compiled everything and said everything was okay. And so you have to be a bit disciplined in that respect and make sure that you're publishing your view of the world, like at the time the compiler runs.
But it's the same thing that we're already doing with our multiple Jupyter repos, or where the lowest level dependency gets published and then you up the chain. So it's the same concept, just applied to a single repo.
Now, will we publish on NPM Phosphor and JupyterLab as a single NPM package, or will we publish independent, separate?
There will be independent, separate packages on NPM.
Okay.
Right. So a consumer of JupyterLab document registry would only get that piece, as opposed to getting the entire blob that is JupyterLab. And then, so that allows them to independently version themselves. You only take the pieces you need, but the piece is at the package, the sub-module level.
But will there be a JupyterLab package that has everything as well?
I would say no at this point. No meta package.
I mean, I guess it doesn't matter with JupyterLab because you're just going to pip install it anyway. But with Phosphor,
because we want you to use an import as JupyterLab /stock manager, for example, not JupyterLab top level.
Right. No, and because we already have a one-line way of installing JupyterLab, it doesn't matter. But is there a one-line way of installing Phosphor, or will it just be add separate Phosphor packages as you come across the need for them?
I
guess that makes sense. I guess it makes sense with Phosphor. Yeah. Okay. Fine. I was just worried because for a second I forgot how you install JupyterLab. So it's cool. It's fine.
A la carte, the same way Babel monorepo packages are. So it very much mirrors that structure. except the only difference is we're not using the single version across the different submodules, because that forces, if you make a patch release to one, then they all have to be patch released. So we're trying out this Semver managed compromise and see how well it works, as long as we can be disciplined about it.
I just saw Kyle Kelly tweeted this Lerna.js, Lerna.js. Have any of you seen that?
Right, that's what Babel is using to enforce that single package or monorepo where they're all versioned the same. So they do that tool lets you do a coordinated release.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the thing I don't like about that is that, like, let's say, like collections, the phosphor collections package gets stable and we're not adding anything to it. But every change that I make in phosphor UI, which is going to be often as we add more features, then when I release, now all of those other stable packages get bumped because everything is in that version, and I don't want to do that. And so, just because it's silly to have 20 different versions of the same identical code of a package. So,
with no releases.
Yeah.
Right, and the same with JupyterLab. If the doc manager, we lock that down, but we want to change something about the CSV widget, then we can now change that independently.
Hey guys.
Hi, sorry. Combination of weird time zone, as in unfamiliar time zone, and several weeks off. I totally forgot about this.
And Kyle's there too. Hi,
Kyle.
Hey. Yeah.
Because you've been up at all hours, Jason.
What?
I've seen commits and comments from you at every hour of the day.
That's my goal, is to fill out that calendar. Fill out that little GitHub whatever green thing. No, I was kind of sick yesterday, so I took a nap, which meant I was up later and everything. So, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your discussion. Carry on, and I can give a short update when it's appropriate.
So the last piece I had was right now internally our tests in JupyterLab are not compatible with Notebook 4.3.1, which led me to look at alternative testing solutions. I tried out Selenium, and the great thing about Selenium is that you could be on the same origin, but in practice, and I have a write-up, I made a test repository as a proof of concept. Everything works except if you want to run unit tests, you'd like to get the output of that. And the ability to capture the console logs is broken on Chrome in that it only respects the first argument to console log. So if you give variadic args to console log, it'll only give you back the first one. Firefox is not implemented. And it is only if you use Firefox 47 or earlier, which is way out of date. And then it's not implemented for any other browser. So we'd be restricting ourselves to limping along on Chrome. And it also forced you to install a separate binary to drive Chrome. So it's the Chrome driver binary that you'd have to install. It was just an untenable approach to force every user install to do this, and it limited the browsers we could test against. I do have a solution, I believe, to getting us compatible with 4.3.1 without having to resort to turning off all the security flags. I'm almost there with that. But the Selenium is still a great tool for if we want to say make sure that the JupyterLab page loads properly on Travis. We could spin up the page and check some content on the page and make sure it's there, kind of thing. And the same with our examples. We can make sure the example actually properly loads. So as a Travis test, I still think it's a viable thing. But in terms of using it for our unit tests, I don't see us that being a tenable solution.
So Steve, when you talk about compatibility, I'm not quite sure what you mean in this context.
The new security features in 4.3.1, we're not compatible with them. So we could temporarily disable the flags to make it work, but I think I have the right solution. And it required a change to Jupyter.js services to give back to make sure we always have a body on a post request. That is a solution. Locally, it's working. I haven't tested it back up in JupyterLab. So I think we're close to fixing our security hole without having to resort to Selenium. Selenium would have been a nice to have if it didn't have all these other caveats.
Brian, the basic problem is that the Mocha tests, the way they run is they pass through all your requests through a Mocha server to the actual Jupyter server. And so if we have to get a token from the server and give it back and get a cookie in order to avoid cross-site forgery vulnerability, that breaks with the new version because we effectively have a proxy between us and the actual API server. That wasn't an issue before because we didn't have that token requirement and that vulnerability patch. So between 4.3.0 and 4.3.1, our tests broke because we always had this server in between. So one of the things that Steve has done that's actually kind of awesome is instead of having this proxy server running our tests, he's got basically an extended server, a Jupyter server running our tests. So he's got a separate app that's the test app, and it's a lot closer to the reality of an environment than Mocha was giving us anyway. So even if this had not been a requirement, it sort of seems like this is a purer way of testing it. It seems nicer.
Well, no, like I said, that won't work though because we can't use Selenium because we can't reliably.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah. So we were there. We had it. It's just we got stuck with how do we get the data back out of the page? Although what we could do is have an attribute of the page that isn't a console log, and then make the Mocha reporter write to that location, but we would lose the actual console logs as a result of running the tests themselves.
What if we have this would require us patching Notebook. What if we had a mode of running the Notebook that just disabled that? I mean, that seems like a really...
Yeah, I asked Min, and there is a flag for it. So yeah, we can completely disable these checks. It's just a matter of, do we want to do that going forward?
I mean, it's just in the tests, right?
Right. But it also signifies that Jupyter.js services is not compatible with Notebook 4.3.1. If you wanted to use it for something like kernel gateway, for instance. So that is broken right now because we're not compatible.
Okay, so there is actual something is breaking other than just the tests.
Yes, that was our flag to say, hey, no, we're actually not compatible anymore. So the fix will come in services first, and then that should fix us in JupyterLab testing against the new security features.
But I'm trying to separate. So there's a real bug in Jupyter.js services, and we're going to fix that.
Yes.
And what you're saying is, so if we fix that and then we patch Notebook to allow us to run the tests in a mode where that stuff is disabled, the only risk then is that
Notebook already has that ability right now. So we're just not using it because we'd rather not. We'd rather make sure service works with the security model in place, and then, that's the right way to move forward.
Gotcha. So you want to catch the bugs, such as the one that have emerged with Jupyter.js services.
Right. Yep.
Okay. And you think
overall it's been a positive thing in that I've learned a lot from the Selenium rabbit hole that we can apply to the way we're running our karma tests, and it also gives us capability to, if we want to, automate things like loading the JupyterLab page itself on Travis to make sure that works.
Okay. And so you see a way of moving forward without Selenium?
Yes, I won't know for sure until I patch services and test it in JupyterLab, but I believe we're close.
Okay. Yeah, I've also run into problems with Selenium in other contexts. Like it's a pretty burdensome dependency to take on. I'll just put it that way.
Sure. Yep. Agreed.
So, wow. Very cool. So hold on. Does that mean that JupyterLab can't currently run with 4.3.1?
It can, because we're not cross-origin. You can't run it cross-origin right now. Services cannot run cross-origin. So Jupyter.js services is not compatible with that right now.
Okay, so this explains why I can run JupyterLab on my Jupyter Hub instance with 4.3.1, right, because it's the same origin. Okay, great.
That's why when I released the 0.12 a couple weeks ago, I didn't notice it, because locally everything worked, and on Travis we're running against 4.3.0, not 4.3.1, because it wasn't in the default content channel yet. But then this week I went to run the test locally, and I had upgraded the notebook locally, and that's when I caught it.
Beautiful. Okay. All right. Sylvan or Jason?
Hey, how you doing? Oh yeah, I was just going to mention we've been working a lot on IPyWidgets, though there's been a lot of time off too. I know Sylvan's been working a lot more than I have over the last couple of weeks. I did backport the output widget to 4.3.1, so IPyWidgets 6 beta was relying on Dev Master for Notebook, but now it relies on 4.3.1 plus a PR. Or Dev Master, which depending on the release schedule for Notebook, may mean we want to make a 4.4 release with these changes. So IPyWidget 6 runs on the 4X series, or if we release 5 soon enough, then it's not an issue.
What's your release cycle for IPyWidgets?
Very soon now. We wanted to make a release during the dev meetings. Realized that we had like 90 plus issues to close before we could make a release. Most of those were closed. We have a few new issues since then, and it's like 20 now. Okay. I'd like to make public beta, but not really public, just public to people who actually are authored like complex third-party widget libraries. So I'd like to reach out to the Autodesk folks and the NGLView folks so that they try it out and tell us if there is any like huge blockers for them. Because between 5 and 6, we just changed the programming language. IPyWidgets is written in. So maybe, I mean, they'll find some things, right?
Yeah. So I think you're probably going to release IPyWidgets before Notebook 5.0 by a bit. I think I looked last night and there's 150 issues open on Notebook 5.0. I don't think all those have to be addressed, but we at least have to go through them. The biggest issue is that we're reverting all the Webpack stuff, and there's a lot of third-party extensions, NB extensions that are broken on master, and so I think we're a ways off still. And So I'm guessing we will have to do a 4.4 release of Notebook to be compatible with that. So that's my guess.
I guess too.
If your soon actually is fairly soon.
So also,
Yeah.
regarding JupyterLab, we need to discuss the status of the lab extension that we have in IPyWidgets. So I guess that it's going to be a beta, because we will depend on JupyterLab 0. whatever is released when we do release it. And if the JupyterLab team makes a new version that's backward incompatible in the next 2 weeks, then that package is not going to be usable anymore.
Can you, for that, to mitigate that risk, I would almost think about having the Widgets lab extension be a separate package. Is that viable? I mean, it's a bit of a pain to install, but it would allow you to evolve the lab extension as we evolve JupyterLab on different timescales as evolving Widgets itself.
So yeah, we've been publishing NPM and Python package at different times already. When we're making like minor patch versions of, for example, just the extension and not the widgets. At the moment, we have Widgets NB extension, JupyterLab widgets, and IPyWidgets as Python packages, and we have 4 NPM packages in the same repo. So that'd be great if we could have the same big split as the notebook. Know that we have like a format that is specified and is its own NPM package, just like NB format and things like this.
So we're evolving.
Make the big split.
Or learn from what Chris and Steve are looking at with multiple repos, multiple packages in the same repo.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're evolving code organization, but we already have separate packages that are progressing in version numbers independently.
I'm just, you said something in passing that I'm looking at, and I see that there's in master now a widget schema.
Yeah.
Want to talk about that?
Yeah, this came from a discussion with Kyle at the dev meeting, who wanted us to be more precise about the specification of the different protocols and formats used by IPyWidgets. So widget schema is a JSON schema for the widget manager state, and which is a specification for the application vendor Jupyter widget state MIME type. We can generate these from a pure Python. From the pure Python, IPyWidgets can generate this schema without the JavaScript, and we can also generate it from the JavaScript. When we save it, when we save a notebook with widget state, we actually do that. And this is also what is used by the widget embedder, the Sphinx extension, and the NB Sphinx package.
That's really exciting. Just great work. I think that's going to really help sort of standardize widgets and encourage people to develop around them. And so that's I know we had talked some about it, but that's really cool. I'm glad that moved forward.
There is a very lengthy document in the new documentation that describes all of the moving pieces of that, of how to use widgets in web context, in the documentation, in NB Viewer. No, NB Viewer renders widgets. I don't know if you saw that.
Really?
Yeah, if you go to the NB Viewer, let me give you a link. Widgets list. Yeah, there you go.
And by widgets, do you mean just the default widgets that we ship?
No, all of them.
Like which widgets?
All of them. The custom widgets. Sorry, it's you need to complete the URL with 20. Yeah, there you go.
Where did you paste it?
In the chat. Come on, it's like removing the URLs with when I copy a. You got it?
I see it. So I have to do. Yep. Hold on. There we go. I see the notebook, but I don't see widgets.
Yeah, this is new. So it was there.
Okay, but so how are you render? Like, can you render BQ plot there?
Yeah, it does work. I think there is an end package
error when I try to load the page, Sylvan.
Yeah. So and then my next question is, could we use what you've done in NB Viewer to enable NB Viewer to render other custom MIME types?
Can we use, what do you mean?
So it looks like you have an NB Viewer rendering the widget MIME type, correct?
Yeah.
How difficult would it be for NB Viewer to render other MIME types?
No, we actually replace anything that has MIME type something plus JSON with a script tag of and that JSON. In the JSON, if the notebook JSON, you have a key that in the output area, you have a key that is of a certain MIME type plus JSON. Yep. It's going to replace that with a script of the correct MIME type with the same content.
Okay.
That's all it does. And then NB Viewer has a script tag that does the embedding. So it's the widget embedder.
Okay, so we could add a new embedder for other MIME types.
Yeah.
Okay, that got it. This is sort of I guess this discussion is now way off topic from JupyterLab, but it's still like.
Well, the meeting is JupyterLab/notebook.
That's
and
true.
Widgets, I think, falls in that too. However, so the last thing is a couple of us are meeting together in the vein of the schema and working together. So Paul, Kyle, Ian, et cetera, and Sylvan are talking about next generation thing. Actually, it's going on right now. We stepped out of that meeting in order to come here. About widget models moving forward, how we might work together with real-time collaboration. I'm sorry? Someone said something?
Oh, I think Brian just lost his connection.
Oh.
It was Brian, but maybe he'll pop back in.
Yeah, so these are just some conversations.
Actually, the notebook I sent, it was probably resaved, and that's why it didn't work. I have another link. The widgets event works, yeah. So it's probably that the notebook was corrupted. So if you check the second links, you see the widgets working. So I probably need to resave that notebook. So for example, in the end, you see that the JavaScript links work for the slider with the second link.
Confirmed. The JS link is working.
Yeah. So it's just a notebook. The widgets list notebook needs to be resaved with the widget state. Brian, you're muted.
Sorry, Jason. I had to restart Blue Jeans there and missed everything you said.
a couple of us are getting together to talk about next generation sort of widget models and how it may interact with real-time collaboration or interact, etc. We'll post a summary of whatever items that we have out of the discussion, but just FYI.
Fantastic.
And actually, that's going on right now. We stepped out of it to come to this meeting, so, and I think we're about closing time here anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, is that it, guys?
So one other thing I wanted to bring to folks' attention, there's an issue on the triggering tooltips using Shift-Tab. And there's at least enough consensus that we need to implement something there that I think there's a little bit of ambiguity about exactly what we'll implement. In particular, does the tooltip stay open as the user continues to type? There's the tooltip in the classic notebook has a couple different modes, and it doesn't sound like we need to implement all those modes. We need to have sort of one general purpose mode. And so I at least wanted to bring that up. And I'll post a link to that in the hack pad, but there's an issue open and a lengthy discussion. Yeah. I think there's more or less.
I've been following it after the state restoration stuff is at a usable state. That's my next thing I'm going to.
Okay. And then I did see there's Matthias found a bug with triggering the tab completion, scrolling the notebook page. And the example that he showed was using a cell that was larger than the panel. And this tends to be an issue that we run into a lot with Classic Notebook, and we've had to sort of do a lot of work on that particular edge case and focus related issues. And so as we test different things in the notebook, it's something to keep in mind. Anything related to focus, always test it both with small cells, but also with big cells that span more than the notebook panel. Browsers handle those two cases differently, apparently. So something to be aware of.
Right, yeah.
All right, we're at 10 o'clock. Thanks everybody for joining today. We'll catch you next Tuesday and then again on Friday. Bye, Internet. See ya.